Hi, Brian Lehrer here. Up next, Brian Lehrer Weekend. 3 of our favorite segments from the week packaged together for you to listen to on the weekend. So enjoy, and I'll see you back on the radio Monday at 10 a.m. on WNYC and WNYC.org. It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning, everyone. We'll talk a lot about health on the show today, including about the nurses who help keep people healthy and are now on strike at some New York hospitals. Also, we'll dig into the new RFK Jr. official U.S. dietary guidelines. We haven't had a chance yet to do that on this show, and we can do it in pretty extended form. We have a Harvard epidemiologist who will bring the science and answer your questions. We'll also bring some politics. And we'll have the New York Times reporter who wrote yesterday that the Trump EPA's new process for making air pollution rules will stop taking a certain thing into account. How many lives air pollution rules can save? Just that little thing. Apparently only the cost to businesses will be officially calculated, the article says. We'll talk to the reporter on that story. And at the end of the show, we'll discuss the growing trend of online betting, not just on sports, but on anything, including world events like elections and economic indicators, even war and peace. We'll invite your calls on what non-sports betting you yourself may be doing, and we'll discuss the possible consequences in the world beyond the money that you might win or lose of people being able to bet on such consequential things. Let's start with the nurses' strike. Some 15,000 nurses at major New York City hospitals are on strike, walking off the job in a dispute over staffing levels, pay, and safety, and forcing a high-stakes confrontation between frontline healthcare workers and some of the state's largest hospital systems. These include several of the city's most prominent hospitals, New York Presbyterian/Columbia, Montefiore Medical Center, and Mount Sinai's main campus, as well as 2 other hospitals within the Mount Sinai system. It's not every hospital in any of these systems that are being struck, but various ones. The nurses have drawn public support, as you may have heard, from elected officials, including New York Attorney General Letitia James, the new New York City Comptroller Mark Levine, and for the new mayor, Zohran Mamdani, it's an early example of how he's interested in supporting labor.
We know that during 9/11, it was nurses that tended to the wounded. We know that during the global pandemic, it was nurses that came into work even at the expense of their own health. They showed up even when we didn't have protective equipment for them. They showed up even as others were staying home. Bottom line, they showed up.
Mayor Mamdani speaking from one of the picket lines yesterday. The strike also comes as hospitals, from their point of view, warn about rising costs and looming federal health care cuts, while the nurses say the system has been stretched beyond what patients and staff can safely sustain. And they also charge hospitals with breaking promises made after the last strike just a few years ago. Joining us now is Nancy Hagans, president of the New York State Nurses Association. We're going to talk to the president of the union. She is also a working nurse at Maimonides Medical Center, the Brooklyn Safety Net Hospital. Hagans was at the bargaining table during the last major contract fight there and joined us then about 3 years ago when nurses reached an agreement and avoided a strike. This week, she is actively participating in the current strike and has been out on the picket line as negotiations with hospitals continue. Nancy, thanks for joining us again. Welcome back to WNYC.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
And listeners, we can take your calls on this too. If you are a nurse on strike or if you do another job at one of these hospitals, help us report this story. Hospital administrators can call in, too, and anyone supporting them. Nurses, what are you demanding? What are conditions like where you work right now? Again, any other hospital staff can call and describe this as well. And how is the strike affecting patients and staff? 212-433-WNYC. For anyone related to this issue, 212-433-9692. You can call or you can text 212-433-9692. So, Nancy, you've been out on the picket line. I happened to pass one of the picket lines yesterday, and it was a enthusiastic, noisy bunch. So as of now, who exactly is on strike across New York City, and what specifically are nurses demanding at this moment?
As of now, we have the nurses from New York Presbyterian hospitals. We have nurses from Mount Sinai Men and Morningside West, and as well as Montefiore Medical Center. I asked the three majors. Our patients come first. We are requesting safe staffing. 3 years ago, we won a lot of staffing languages and protection. The hospitals have decided to roll back. And as you know, there's increase in violence at the place. And as you know, last week, there was an active shooter at one of the NYP, New York Methodist in Brooklyn. And we are asking for management to have workplace violence protection. Of course, we are asking to keep our medical coverage. And what management have decided to do, they want to take away our medical coverage. Nurses are the backbone of this healthcare system. If nurses are not healthy, if we don't have good medical coverage, we cannot get up and take care of patients. At the height of the pandemic, everyone stayed home. We went to work. We saved New York. Without proper PPE, without vaccine, we were there. What we are asking is for us to have proper medical coverage.
Let me jump in and ask you to get specific about that one, because I'm sure a lot of listeners who are not familiar with the issues in the strike and the negotiations are thinking, wait, that's ironic. Nurses not being being given good health coverage, medical coverage. Correct. Give us some of the specifics of that. You say some of it's being taken away, or they want to take it away. What's the healthcare coverage now, and what's the change that they're proposing?
It's the most, first of all, as you know, being a nurse is toxic physically and mentally, okay? But we have coverage. We could go to the doctors. We don't need a referral to go to the doctors. Our coverage, I've also covered our spouse that don't have medical coverage and our dependents. What they pretty much telling us that our coverage is too expensive. They're not able to pay for our coverage. And those three main hospitals, especially NYP, New York Presbyterian and Mount Sinai, they are the one driving up the cost. I work in a safety net hospital. A procedure that would cost $10,000 for a patient at the place where I work, New York Presbyterian will charge triple of that. They are saying that they cannot afford us because our medical is too expensive. Yet the CEO at New York Presbyterian made $26 million last year. Yet they are bragging how they spent over $200 million to hire replacement nurses. What we're asking, take the money, invest into our communities, invest into our patient staffing, invest into our medical coverage. We are asking to keep the same coverage that we have in order for us to stay healthy, in order for us to seek proper medical attention when we need to. Because right now, at the height of the pandemic, we lost some of our nurses due to the pandemic because we've been exposed. We are exposed every time that we go to work. With the surge of the flu, our nurses are more likely to get sick. And if I am sick, I cannot go to work. I cannot take care of the public if I'm not healthy.
On all the money that you say they're spending for replacement nurses, here's an example of that. According to the New York Times article on the strike, New York Presbyterian had a spokesperson tell the Times that they spent $60 million preparing for the strike, hiring more than 1,700 contingency nurses. And you brought up CEO pay. I'm going to play another clip of Mayor Mamdani on this particular issue, but also ask you how relevant it is. Here is the mayor again on the picket line yesterday.
The hospital executives who run these hospitals, the ones where these hardworking nurses are asking for what they deserve, these executives are not having difficulty making ends meet. The CEO and president of Montefiore made more than $16 million last year. The CEO of New York Presby, where we are today, made $26 million last year.
So my question for you about that is, we may have reason to be grossed out by high CEO pay that high, but is it too symbolic a thing to focus on? The pay increases you want for thousands of nurses can't be made up by reducing a few top manager salaries, right?
What we are saying, nurses get up day in and day out to go to work. We put our lives up front. The patients come first. As you know, right now there's an inflation. What we are asking for an increase in wages. Wages could always be negotiated. What we will not negotiate is cutting corners to care for our patients. Management have not proposed any type of increase. They are hypocrites because they're going out there and saying that the nurses want this money and that money. What they are not saying, nurses want safe patient care. We want safe staffing. Nurses want to go to work and have protection and workplace violence. Nurses want to go to work where we could have good medical coverage and pension and fair wages. We will continue to negotiate in good faith. We will negotiate our wages, but we will not cut corners when it comes to take care of our patients, when it comes to take care of New Yorkers. Every patient deserves a real nurse at the bedside. These are the richest hospitals that are trying to replace nurses with AI. Patients need human touch. Patients need a nurse at the bedside, and that we will not cut corners on. We will continue to stand up and fight for our patients. We will continue to go out there and send a message. Everybody is a VIP. Everybody needs to be taken care of, regardless of your zip code, regardless of your religion, regardless of your immigration status, regardless of your sexual orientation, regardless. All our patients. We need to tell those greedy CEOs, patients before profits.
Let's take a call from another nurse. Margaret in Manhattan, you're on WNYC. Hi there. Thank you so much for calling in.
Hi, Brian. I've called you a bunch of times. I'm really disappointed with the spin in the media. I know they try to be balanced, but they are believing administration's lies that we're not asking for a 40% wage increase. I've been a nurse at Mount Sinai for 13 years, and I made $134,000 last year. So that would put me, really, at over $200,000? No, that's not what we're asking for. We want to keep our health care, as Nancy was saying, that we won last time. But they literally took our contract and handed it back to us with everything we won crossed out in red. And they say that they've been negotiating in good faith. This is a lie. They have been sitting at meetings, at negotiations on their phones, not speaking, sometimes laughing when the union is proposing things, and leaving early, taking long lunch breaks, not coming back. So they are not negotiating in good faith. They are so annoyed that we got such a good contract, and they've had to pay nurses millions of dollars when we work short, not on my floor. My floor is well-staffed. But units that are short-staffed, they've had to pay nurses the difference as if they were staffed properly, which has added up to millions of dollars. Of course, they don't want to do that anymore.
Because they have to pay overtime.
Not overtime.
No, it's not overtime. Sorry, Margaret.
It's not overtime. No, it's okay. It's for, if they had the correct amount of nurses, they've had to pay that difference to the nurses that are working. And this is a mostly female-driven profession, and we're used to doing work of 10 people. So they don't want to have to keep paying us and hiring enough nurses. It's very expensive. So now they're spending so much money to squeeze us because they know that most nurses live paycheck to paycheck, so that we can't. So they're hoping that we give in and give our concessions back, and we're not going to. We're not going to give back these ratios that we want.
We are not going back.
Margaret,
And
let me ask you
thank you.
one follow-up question, and Nancy, you can get back in after that.
Sure.
If you want to counter the 40% wage increase spin that the hospitals are putting on it, what would you tell our listeners that the actual wage demand is?
I think that's more a question for Nancy because I don't go to the negotiations,
Right,
but
okay.
I've heard that we asked for 10% and we backed off because that was too high. I think Mount Sinai would say, oh, but we're including their health care and their pension and their benefits, and that's why we come up with this outrageous number. Believe me, it does not add up to almost, $275,000, which is what I saw in the New York Times yesterday.
Yeah.
I'd love to make that much money.
Margaret, thank you. Thank you very much. Nancy, you want to
Thanks,
expand
Brian.
on that?
Yes, they are inflating the numbers. They are actually lying because, like Margaret said, I don't know where they got their numbers from. Somebody would have to ask them. Nobody ever asked for 40%. And the public realize that. Nurses, we come to work to care for our patients. We come to work. I'm an ICU nurse. I leave my house at 6 a.m. Sometimes if I don't have a cup of coffee before leaving my house, or if I had a cup of coffee, that's my first and last meal for the day until I go home. For the most time, we work without taking a break. We take care of our patients. We sit there. We don't want to leave our patients alone if they don't have a visitor. And like I said, during the height of the pandemic, the CEO that made $26 million said to us he couldn't come to the hospital because he was afraid of COVID. He was at his second home, playing golf. We saved New York. We stayed here. What we are asking is safe nurse-to-patient ratios, which they want to take away. What we are asking is to keep our medicals in order to take care of ourselves and our family. What we are asking is to go to work, and where we don't have an active shooter coming in and threatening to shoot the nurses and the patients, we need protection toward workplace violence. What we are asking is a fair wage so we also could take care of our families.
What new, if you're asking for new workplace protections from violence, are you asking? Certainly a lot of the listeners heard about that
metal detector.
Awful active shooter incident at a city hospital the other day. So go ahead, tell us what you're asking for.
Most of their hospital entrances have no weapon detectors. Anybody could walk in and out. Panic buttons. So we could have on us that if somebody's coming in, we could press, the button, and somebody could walk in and take care of us. A de-escalation team, that a team could walk in. There's, like usually when you have, certain emergency, if you have a fire, there's a number that you call. There's a number that we need to call when we have those situations because, especially people are coming in and out. You don't know what weapon they have on them. Look what happened at NYP New York Methodist. Patients held, staff hostage. The police intervened. Unfortunately, we lost a life. But if we have weapon detector, then if somebody's walking into the institution, then that the weapon could be picked up. There is no protection for us right now. And we need to protect our patients. We also need to protect ourselves in order for us to continue to deliver proper care. We are asking
a listener
to go
is
to work.
texting if the financial situation of nurses was exaggerated by the last caller when she said living paycheck to paycheck. If she is making $134,000, she said, I see the stat in the Times that at Montefiore, for example, pay for starting nurses is $119,000. Not to say that can't be more, but in terms of how you spin what sort of social class the nurses are in, or the phrase paycheck to paycheck.
I hear you, but you know what? Everybody's focusing on the paycheck, what they are saying. You live in New York. What is your rent right now? Your rent is very high. Your electric bill is very high. Your gas bill is very high. We pay the highest taxes, city taxes, and then you have to go to work. You have a family. Some of us are the head of household. I'm a widow. I give myself as an example. I have two daughters. So I'm the head of my family. And some of us immigrant descent, we also have to take care of their loved ones back at home. A nurse's salary, when we come to work, we have double of the assignment that we're supposed to have. We still get the same pay. The hospitals still make the profits. This is not about pay. This is about safety for our patients. This is about working in an environment where we could deliver high quality care to all our patients.
Wait.
More nurses, better care. If you have more nurses, the patient is less likely to develop a bed sore. If you have proper nurses, the patient is less likely to develop pneumonia, because you could get your patients out of bed. When you're a patient in the hospital, you need your nurse at the bedside. When you walk into that emergency room, the first person you see is a nurse. When you're going to go home, the last person you see is a nurse. We are at the bedside providing care, but we need safe staffing in order to continue to do it. We need to have proper medical coverage in order to protect ourselves, because if we are healthy, then we have a healthy New York. We could come to work and take care of our patients. This is, I know the greedy CEOs with their millions that they are making wants to make this about salary, inflating numbers. I have no idea where they come up with the 40%. They would have to explain it to you, because there is no type of math that makes sense.
Right. The estimate of what you're asking for, according to you and according to the hospitals, is so different. Reading from the New York Times article, it says Mount Sinai said the union salary demands would increase the average pay to $275,000 over 3 years. The Nurses Association, which you lead, says Mount Sinai was only offering about $4,500 more per nurse. So we won't resolve all of those numbers today, but I'm just laying out how different even the public statements of what's on the table are.
Sorry, this is what they said to us. We're going to give you $4,500 a year. You take it. It's either you use it toward your medical coverage, or you use it toward your pension, or you use it toward your pay increase. Okay. How could you use $4,500 for the year toward your medical coverage? Anybody try to go to the open market right now to buy your own medical coverage? It doesn't even cost $4,500. That's all they put on the table.
I happen to be biased right now because I've been supporting a relative in and out of the hospital in recent weeks. And I won't name the hospital, but every single nurse I have come into contact with has been an absolute saint and has taken the time to explain things, to be cheerful, even if they were under stressful conditions themselves. And I just have so much respect for the profession, not that I didn't already, but with my recent contacts, just saying that I have encountered many nurses just in recent weeks who are absolute saints, one after another. So whatever training they do, whatever the ethics of your profession are, I just want to say it's working in my experience. Here is another nurse calling in. Michael in Brooklyn, you're on WNYC, and this is on the staffing. Michael, you're on WNYC. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good. What you got?
I just wanted to bring up this point. It really isn't about the money, and I think Nancy's doing a good job of bringing this up. In all honesty, I would give up part of my salary for more staff, more aides, more nurses. Someone brought up earlier, one of the previous callers brought up that, if we're short, the salary for that nurse that's missing is split between the rest of us. I don't even want that money. I just want the nurse. I just want more help.
Amen.
In addition to that, we need more safety here. There really isn't metal detectors in most of the hospitals, and things happen. the security sometimes gets overwhelmed. They can't screen everyone. We've had instances where, a drug dealer comes to the floor to meet a patient who's an addict, and the nurses are expected to deal with it because we're the first ones to see that happen. In addition to that, we have lots of patients who swing at staff, not necessarily because they're angry, but maybe because they are delirious. And we need more staff to help calm them down and take care of them better. And it just makes for a better overall patient experience for everyone. That's all I wanted to say.
Michael, thank you very much. Let me ask you a Mamdani question, Nancy. Do you think it matters that this mayor is as pro-labor as he is and showed up on the picket line yesterday? Is that different from Mayor de Blasio, who's certainly, pro-labor in his general orientation? Do you see anything unique about Mayor Mamdani so far, and could that affect the outcome of this strike?
Mayor Mamdani did what he promised when he ran, that he is pro-labor, he is with the working people, he is with justice for working people, he believes in equitable. And what he did yesterday is exactly what he promised to do for New Yorkers, for all New Yorkers when he ran for office. And we appreciate him coming to the picket line. We appreciate him keeping his promise when he ran for office. He ran on the working people and supporting labor, and that's exactly what he did yesterday.
One of the things that he campaigned on, and I don't know if he's going to be serious about trying to make this a reality, but I wonder if you would be for it or against it, is getting the not-for-profit status of some of these hospitals, which are technically not-for-profit, even though there's, obviously a lot of money flow in and out, and the CEOs get paid what they get paid, ending the not-for-profit status of some of the major hospitals. Would that be helpful to the nurses, harmful to the nurses, or neither?
I believe this is a question that you have to go straight to the mayor. All I know that when he ran to his campaign, he made a promise to stand with the working people in this city, to stand with labor, and that's exactly what he did yesterday.
So the union doesn't
and we want him to continue to stand.
The union
with
doesn't
us.
have a position on that now.
Well, our position
Yes, go
is
ahead.
that patients before profits. We're telling all these greedy CEOs because Mount Sinai, Montefiore, New York Presbyterian are the richest hospital in New York City. All 8 safety nets hospital, including the one where I work, managed to reach a tentative agreement with over 5,000 nurses and promised to keep our current medical, promised to protect us from workplace violence, right? Promise safe staffing. These are all tentative agreements that we achieve to all the poorest hospitals in New York City. So my message to those 3 rich hospitals, what is your excuse? You have no excuse not to come to the table and negotiate a fair contract like we did at all the safety net hospitals.
And to be clear for our listeners, the safety net hospitals are public hospitals. Those are government institutions. The hospitals that you're striking are private hospitals, these private nonprofits, Montefiore, Mount Sinai, and New York Presbyterian. And just for accuracy's sake, so I don't overstate the mayor's position, the Times article quoted him saying during the campaign that the city, quote, needs to reconsider its relationship to wealthy private hospitals, unquote. And he questioned whether such hospitals deserve to keep their tax exemption. So maybe he didn't quite propose that they lose them, but he was raising it as an issue. Here's Tom in Manhattan calling, if I see this right, as a patient at a New York Presbyterian hospital, and with a report from the front on the nurses' strike in progress. Tom, you're on WNYC. Hello, where are you?
Hello. Yes, I'm at Columbia Presbyterian and the main hospital. I'm on a floor that is the standard of care because of the specialty of the floor is among the highest that anybody ever sees. It's an extraordinary place. The nurses are usually, well, as you've described them, they're magnificent. So we've now have 2 days of I'll be polite, of traveling nurses who are brought in. Confusion is fairly general. I've already had my medication messed up twice, and I'm now watching over it myself as opposed to trusting my nurses to be in charge of it. Generally, it's a scandal. That's all. The care, the general care at Columbia Presbyterian is so high, and so much of that has to do with the nurses and their extraordinary care and good-naturedness and ability to extend themselves, and all of that is not around. We're just lucky that the people who are just subsidiary to the nurses, the techs and people like that, are still here. So there is a certain kind of quality, but the fact that we're seeing the standard of care just go down.
I'm glad you are saying out loud the experience that you've had with the on-staff nurses. I'm sure there are bad nurses in the world, but with the number that I've encountered, and every single one has been a saint, you get a sense, and your story backs it up, of what
and a saint with a good sense of humor.
That's true in my experience too. So, Tom, thank you for saying all of that. I hope whatever you're in for resolves successfully. Let me take one more call here. K.A. in Manhattan, you're on WNYC, an ER nurse calling in. I won't say your hospital in case you don't want to say it, but hi, K.A.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, my name's K.A. They, them pronouns. I'm an ED nurse at Mount Sinai Hospital, and I am on strike. I wanted to say that one of the major things that we're asking for, and that Nizna and Nancy have also put in the pillars of the strike, is to keep ICE out of hospitals unless they are required to be let in because they have a valid judicial warrant, so that ICE doesn't come in if they have another kind of warrant that is up to the hospital's discretion, like an administrative warrant or simply even an investigation. We've seen ICE in the hospitals, in the EDs, in New York City. Patients are afraid. They are concerned that they'll be deported when they see anyone in uniform. And nurses and staff are concerned with being confronted by ICE, being vulnerable. We know ICE is not just looking at people's immigration status, but simply looking at, the color of their skin and the language that they're speaking. So people are in danger that we're taking care of and that we're working with and relying on. So a big part of safe staffing and ending workplace violence is keeping ICE out of the hospital. We have a major proposal for this on the table at Mount Sinai Hospital and at other hospitals in the city. The executives, lawyers have had this proposal since July. We've been working on this since March. They've barely come to the table, and they've crossed everything out. They don't want to agree that keeping ICE out of the hospital is a workplace issue, and it's definitely related to workplace violence and safe staffing and keeping patients safe. So I wanted to share that with listeners, that's another reason we're out there striking.
I appreciate you calling in, K.A., and raising that as part of this segment. Nancy, you want to end on that? Do you want to talk about anything ICE-related
well, I would
that's
like
specifically
to say
in the
you.
negotiations?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we, as nurses, we want to take care of patients regardless of their immigration status, regardless of their financial status, regardless of their sexual orientation, regardless of their religions, regardless. All our patients are VIPs, and we need to be able to take care of our patients, and we need to our patients to come to the hospital where they feel safe. Thank you.
Nancy Hagans, president of the New York State Nurses Association. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning again, everyone. Now an exit interview with the outgoing New Jersey Attorney General, Matt Platkin. He has had a pretty notable tenure as Attorney General. You could call it controversial or perhaps consequential, depending on how you see things. Platkin came into the national spotlight through his leadership in a series of lawsuits against the Trump administration, including challenges involving birthright citizenship and federal funding tied to programs like SNAP. In Jersey, he pushed aggressive gun violence reduction efforts, brought corruption cases against powerful political figures, and led major lawsuits against corporations ranging from social media companies to chemical manufacturers accused of environmental contamination. And as might be expected, in a state with a long and complicated history of political corruption, many New Jerseyans listening right now, I don't have to tell you, right? His time in office has also been marked by intense pushback, even from members of his own party. Republicans attempted to impeach him and charge him with using the office for his own political gain, but some Democrats accused him of using the office to target political allies. State police unions sued him. So by any measure, it's been an eventful 4 years. Now, for some background, Platkin was appointed by Governor Murphy in 2022. New Jersey is one of the few states where the Attorney General is appointed by the governor and confirmed by the legislature rather than elected independently, like Tish James in New York, for example. Platkin, so therefore, will step down as Governor-elect Mikey Sherrill takes office on January 20th and names his successor. So Attorney General Platkin is with us now to reflect on these past 4 years, the intense legal and constitutional moment we're in right now, and maybe what he hopes the next Attorney General will pursue from his work or independently. Attorney General Platkin, thanks for doing this. Welcome back to WNYC.
Thanks so much for having me.
Let's start with some of your lawsuits against Trump, beginning with birthright citizenship. How did your office become the national leader in that case?
Yeah, well, look, the executive order that tried for the first time in 157 years to eliminate birthright citizenship from the United States Constitution was signed around 8 p.m. on the president's first day in office. We filed the first suit the next morning at about 11 a.m. Obviously, it takes a tremendous amount of preparation to be able to move that quickly. The work really started in the beginning of 2024 when myself, people like Tish James, and a handful of other attorneys general across the country came together and said, look, what President Trump on the campaign trail is saying, what they wrote in Project 2025 is really scary for our states. And we don't want to be caught flat-footed if and when this comes to pass. So we spent months preparing for those initial sets of executive orders. And it just so happened that the first one out of the gate was, again, an attempt to say for the first time since the Civil War that babies born on U.S. soil would not be treated and given the same rights and privileges of every U.S. citizen. So I'm proud that we led that suit right up to the United States Supreme Court, and I'm proud that birthright citizenship remains a constitutional protection in this nation thanks to our work.
What do you think of what's happening now in Minnesota from a state and federal jurisdiction standpoint? Homeland Security Secretary Noem has now announced deployment of more ICE agents there after the shooting of Renee Good last week. ICE agents, from reports I've seen, were going door to door, especially in largely Somali neighborhoods, rather than focusing on violent felons, as was the original stated, premise of what Trump deportation policy was going to prioritize. There's even the possibility, and this is where my question for you comes in, of state police or state deployed National Guard intervening against ICE in some states if the state perceives ICE as acting illegally. Have you grappled with that set of issues, even though you haven't had to directly confront it in New Jersey?
Yeah, we've thought through a whole range of scenarios. And I would just say, look, I think everybody wants a secure border. We want to make sure that our nation's protected. But that is a very different question than saying whether American citizens should be terrorized or potentially murdered by a rogue law enforcement agency. And you know, what I saw last week, obviously the shooting itself was horrific. And put aside whatever you think, Renee Good was a 37-year-old mother, not much younger than myself. And if you can't take a step back and show some humanity in that moment, as the vice president of this nation clearly was unable to do, you know, you should reassess whether you should be in public life. Because the situation right now across this country really scares me, and it should scare every American. Because I think we're at the precipice of something really alarming, where you have this rogue law enforcement agency where they're paying $50,000 a recruit. They're giving them none of the training that law enforcement usually has. And they're sending them out to essentially terrorize residents of this country, whether American citizens or not. That puts our residents at risk, puts our citizens at risk, and it puts law enforcement at risk. And so I am very concerned about the escalation that seems to be the goal here, no matter who it affects. And in this case, it resulted in a 37-year-old American citizen mother killed on the streets in Minnesota.
Do you think state authorities could or should ever try to arrest ICE agents for acting what they may consider illegally?
Yeah, I think the law in certain circumstances would allow it. And I think, look, it's the federal officers are appropriately afforded broad immunity for their actions. But throughout the nation's history, we've seen examples where they've exceeded that authority in ways that break the law. And I would think potentially a law enforcement officer, federal or otherwise, if they, and I'm not prejudging this case, but generally speaking, if you're committing an act of homicide, that's a pretty good set of facts, I think, for a state to test that immunity limitation. Mm-hmm. It cannot be the case that federal officers can kill American citizens who are breaking no laws with impunity. That cannot be something we can allow in the United States of America. I can't even believe I have to say that.
In your tenure as New Jersey Attorney General, you also led several lawsuits against big corporations. One of them, in 2023, you filed suits against social media companies like TikTok, Meta, and Discord for engaging in deceptive practices, allegedly, that you said were harmful to children and teenagers. Where does that case stand?
Yeah, I'm proud that we've led some of the most consequential lawsuits against these tech platforms that have been essentially treating kids, a generation of kids, as guinea pigs, and causing a mental health crisis that has affected, like I said, a generation of children. So we are a lead state in the TikTok and Meta cases, which I'm proud have broad bipartisan coalitions that have brought those suits. And I'm proud that New Jersey is in a position which we probably wouldn't have been before my tenure to lead those suits. And those suits are proceeding. And I believe they're going to deliver real results for the people in this country and relief for our kids. Discord is another great example. We were the first state to sue Discord. 200 million kids are on that platform. That company just announced, by the way, that they want an IPO. We were the first state to sue them after we found a series of really harmful things that kids were experiencing on their platforms, despite the fact that Discord was telling parents and kids alike that it was safe when they knew it wasn't. And that's a pattern we're seeing with these social media companies, and increasingly now with AI companies, where they're telling you their products are safe when they know they aren't. And that's just textbook consumer fraud. It's the same types of case we brought against tobacco industry or opioid industry, or you name the industry. And social media companies aren't immune from that type of lawsuit just because they're fancy tech companies. So I'm very proud that as a parent, both as the Attorney General and as a parent of two young children, I'm proud that New Jersey has led some of the most consequential lawsuits ever filed against these social media platforms, which I believe are going to fundamentally reshape how that industry operates.
On what you said earlier about state police possibly arresting federal ICE agents, listener writes, you're talking about a civil war. What would you say to that listener?
No, I don't think that's what you're talking about. I think what you're saying is federal officers under certain circumstances are still subject to the laws of the state in which they operate in. And they are not allowed to just go out and murder people. And so if that's what this president wants, then
Right.
there are consequences for that.
But you're making the distinction between individual acts that might be illegal and an illegal deployment, like get out of our state.
Yeah, and look, those deployments have been litigated. We have supported states like California and Oregon and Illinois in their litigation, and the Supreme Court has spoken on that, and President Trump has withdrawn National Guard troops from states. So the question of whether he can deploy National Guard or United States military, perhaps, is one question. The question of whether an officer in a particular moment has violated state law by assaulting or injuring or tragically killing a resident or a United States citizen of a state, that's a very different question. And, these are questions that we don't tend to deal with too much because we don't usually have federal officers running around terrorizing law-abiding residents of our states, which is what we are seeing right now. ProPublica did a very significant amount of reporting on the number of United States citizens who have been arrested, had their homes searched without warrants, injured, hogtied, assaulted by federal officers. That is not something we have typically seen, at least not in a very long time.
Frederick in Princeton has, I think, kind of the opposite take than the texter whose note I read on the relationship between state police and federal police. Frederick, you're on WNYC with New Jersey Attorney General Matt Platkin. Hi.
Yes, good morning, Brian. Thank you so much for taking my call. I think we need to realize what the facts are. We're in a police state. There is no question about it. We could spin this any way you want, but being a student of politics, I could see where Miller and Bannon are working right out of a German Nazi situation. And they're the ones that fill Trump with all this idea. But we are in a police state, and unless the people understand that, now, if you're gonna call the state police in, you got to remember something. These are all Trumpers. So what are we to do? To use Lenin's words, what are we to do with this situation? That's my comment, Brian.
Frederick, thank you for your call. Well, he's got his opinions, about where we are at the national level. But relevant to you, he brings in the role of the state police. And I guess he doesn't trust the state police as a group because he believes so many of them are probably Trump supporters.
Yeah, I don't think that's a founded concern. I've dealt with law enforcement. We say state police. We're talking about in New Jersey, 42,000 state and local law enforcement officers who I believe are the most professional, best trained law enforcement professionals in the country. But look, I think we could get bogged down in a conversation about whether a specific act violates a state law and whether law enforcement would assess that. I think that remains to be determined how that will play out. I do believe there are circumstances where federal officers could violate state law and be subject to state prosecution. And those circumstances may have already presented themselves. There's a separate question about what, to answer his last question, what Frederick can do. And I think you're seeing that. You saw huge numbers of people show up just yesterday in places across this country, including in New York and in New Jersey, protesting what they saw last week. And we've seen that time and again over the past several months. And I do believe, in a broader sense, we are at a point of I've said this basically since February, I think we've been in a moment of constitutional crisis where the president and his administration has essentially thumbed their nose at the rule of law. And when that happens, the way to respond is for the public to make clear that they don't support it. That has been true in the United States over the course of our history. It's been true in every democratic society in world history. And I do believe, and I want to strike a note of optimism here, because I do believe the public is and has and will make quite clear that this is not the America that we know and love. It's not. When you see clearly political prosecutions or law enforcement, federal law enforcement terrorizing American citizens, that's not who we are. And I believe the public's response to that is what is going to get us through this moment.
I want to ask you about a particular conflict between you and unions that represent the New Jersey State Police. They've sued you, as you know, in a bid to block your investigation into whether troopers deliberately slowed down traffic enforcement in response to claims of racial profiling in some of their stops. They also want the judge, as I understand it, to bar the outside attorneys that you've appointed from investigating racial profiling by the state police further. Where does that stand?
I'm somewhat limited in what I can say for a couple of reasons. One, the suit was unsuccessful, so just put that aside. The person that they were saying was practicing improperly, by the way, was Preet Bharara, who I think many of your listeners know. I have tremendous respect for the state police. I want to be clear. I've worked with them for many years now. I've seen the work we talked about could talk about with gun violence or drug trafficking or responding to the COVID pandemic and emergency management. They do extraordinary work. This particular case was something that I was very concerned about, given the ongoing professional relationship we have and day-to-day working relationship we have. I felt the allegations were sufficiently serious that I needed to bring in somebody from the outside so that we could have an independent person look at it. That is ongoing. I will defer to Mr. Bharara and his team on sort of the status of that. But the civil lawsuit that you referenced, that was unsuccessful.
Okay.
And,
so talk about some of the work that you did with the state police as listeners, if you're just joining us, are reviewing some of the 4 years in office of New Jersey Attorney General Matt Platkin in this exit interview. You did a data analysis, very interesting, with the state police that showed that just 1,000 people in New Jersey are largely responsible for all the gun violence. And by focusing on them, you could reduce shootings. So what's your hope for how those findings are going to inform policy under the next administration?
Yeah, well, look, I think it already has. I mean, I got interested and involved in public service in high school because I grew up in the Columbine generation, and I didn't want to see the gun violence epidemic continue to be the leading cause of death for children. Now, I'm very sad to say that as a parent of 2 young kids, guns continue to be the leading cause of death for children in this country. That should be something that bothers all of us. But in New Jersey, we have treated gun violence like the public health crisis that it is, and we've used every possible avenue to combat it. So as you noted, it is not 9.5 million people causing gun violence in the state of New Jersey. It is around 1,000 people. And when you take a law enforcement approach that holds truly violent people and bad actors accountable, you can, as opposed to, say, dragging a law enforcement net through an entire community, you can be very effective at driving down violence. We have done that. But if that's all we did, we would not have been as effective as we have been. So in addition to that, we've invested historic amounts, and I thank Governor Murphy and the legislature for this as well, in community-based responses to gun violence. 6 years ago, the state had never put $1 in community-based organizations that can reach people and help them understand that violence is not a proper solution to a conflict. Well, now we've put $150 million into that work. I created the first office of its kind nationally that coordinates that work on a statewide level. That work is ongoing and is working. I also created the first office of its kind in the country dedicated to bringing lawsuits against bad actors in the firearms industry. And in the last 2.5 years, we've brought more lawsuits than any other state in the country against bad actors, including some of the largest manufacturers in the world, like Glock and Sig Sauer, as well as retailers who have violated our laws. And all of that has culminated in the lowest levels of gun violence we've ever seen. 3 years ago, I announced that we were going to have under 1,000 people shot in New Jersey. Now, that's 1,000 people too many, but we had never had below 1,000 people. The first year, we had 924 people shot. The next year, 778. Last year, we just announced 559. The 10 years before I took office, the average was over 1,300 people shot. Now we're down to 559, and I hope those numbers keep going down. So my message is simple. It can be very, easy when you look at what the Supreme Court has done, when you look at the state of gun violence, and you see the horrors that we continue to live through, and I've seen a lot of them. It can be easy to become cynical and maybe even a little depressed. But my optimistic note is what we have done in New Jersey shows we can save lives and reduce gun violence to historically low levels at a time when, again, it remains the leading cause of death for kids.
On corruption in New Jersey, I want to ask about the charges that you led as Attorney General against George Norcross, the Democratic Party boss in South Jersey. And just to remind our listeners or those who don't know this story, the Attorney General's office filed a suit last year alleging that Norcross and his allies conspired to take control of waterfront properties to further his business interests. That suit was dismissed by a Superior Court judge. You've appealed the case, but I want to ask you, why do you think the Norcross defense team had so much success influencing public opinion and the legal community? What do you think they missed?
Well, look, I would just say at the outset, anybody who thinks corruption isn't a problem in New Jersey or frankly in this country is living under a rock. Corruption is one of the most fundamental challenges we face as a nation, and it's not victimless. When people skim off the top, we all pay the tab for that. It means we have less money for things that we need, like education and healthcare and law enforcement, and you name it. So I'm not going to apologize for the fact that we have taken an aggressive approach to combating corruption. I think that is why my office literally was created, and I think it's our obligation. And we have had hundreds of successful corruption cases in my tenure, and I'm very proud of that, including some of the most consequential cases New Jersey's ever brought. The case you referenced is on appeal. It was dismissed under a decision that on the basis no court in the country, as far as we can find, has ever dismissed a lawsuit or a criminal case. We'll see how the appeal plays out. Look, the thing about corruption cases, when you bring them, you're bringing them against, by definition, powerful people who have the privilege of a bully pulpit, usually well-resourced. They have a fair amount of influence. That's why they're able to engage in corrupt acts. And they often, no surprise, don't like when they're held accountable. And so they are not people who tend to go quietly into the night. They like to kick up dust. They accuse you of everything under the sun. It is almost always BS, but they do it as a way of maybe retaliating or maybe trying to influence how the case proceeds. And I never let any of that deter me. Our job is to pursue cases by career prosecutors and investigators, as was done in that case. And I don't think anybody should be held to a different standard. I don't think you're treated better or worse because of your stature in life. That is how I've approached every day in this job, in that case and in every case we filed.
And so looking structurally beyond the one case, you created a new trust commission, as you called it, a couple of years ago, to combat corruption. And that commission just issued a report with nearly a dozen recommendations aimed at strengthening transparency and accountability in state government. But you're leaving office, your term is ending. Do you have confidence that the incoming AG, Jennifer Davenport, will follow up on those recommendations?
I have unequivocal confidence in soon-to-be Attorney General Jen Davenport. I've worked with her for many years. She's an exemplary public servant and just a great person. I have no doubt she will do a great job and will continue to be a strong, independent Attorney General who I believe takes corruption seriously. Obviously, she'll make her own assessment on any individual issue or case. But I couldn't have more confidence in somebody coming in to this office. And Brian, this office it can be lonely. You know, you are independent for a reason, and you have to make tough decisions, and you're the one who has to put your name on it. And I've been quite comfortable making tough decisions, and I sleep very well at night knowing I made decisions every single day that I had the privilege of holding this office based on what I thought was right legally and in the best interest of the 9.5 million people who call New Jersey home. And that's it.
And in so doing, you've sometimes alienated fellow Democrats. So let me ask you about this other kind of good government controversy that you've been involved with. That includes Senator Andy Kim. Without getting too bogged down in the details for our listeners, I'll explain briefly as I can. Senator Kim led an effort to reform the way the party organizations endorse candidates in New Jersey, which gives them a leg up on the ballot. And you opposed that effort. You called it unconstitutional, even though many see it as a reform for good government. Kim ultimately won the injunction, spoiler alert, and it's already started to have an impact on elections in the state. More reformers, anti-machine, and progressive candidates won last year. Maybe it's related. Why did you decide to weigh in on the issue when your stance was sure to alienate so many progressives and reformers?
Well, Brian, just to be clear, I actually didn't defend the statute, which I think was the side the reformers wanted.
Okay.
Look, that was an extraordinarily difficult decision personally, but it was one that I think was definitely right legally. And essentially, for those who don't know, it was a long-standing practice that was not grounded in the law that was originally passed about how primary ballots in New Jersey were structured, and it essentially resulted in a substantial advantage for incumbents that we felt violated the First Amendment, among other challenges. And my office generally defends statutes, just to be clear. When a law is challenged in New Jersey, the Attorney General defends it. I don't believe it is my job to inject my personal views when a statute is legally defensible. But we laid out in that case, when we filed our letter, a series of reasons why that law was not defensible and, in fact, undermined, or why that practice, rather, was not defensible and undermined the democratic process. And I think you're seeing, by the way, every court agreed with us on it. And I think you're seeing now a substantial opening up of the democratic process in New Jersey, which I think is a good thing.
So last thing, you've made a mark in this role for sure. You care about these kinds of issues and policies for sure. People, even who never heard of you before, can hear it in this conversation. So I'm guessing it's unlikely you would step back from public service. What's next for Matt Platkin?
Still working on it. I'm not leaving New Jersey. This is where I'm from, and it's where we're raising our kids, my wife and I. I'm going to stay involved here. And the issues that we talked about, Brian, gun violence and combating corruption and standing up for our democracy, those aren't things that I started caring about in 2022. And they're not things that I'm going to stop caring about next Tuesday at noon. So I suspect I'll very much stay involved in all of the above. And I'm just really proud that I had the opportunity and honored that I had the opportunity to serve this state that I love. I'm grateful to the governor. And most importantly, I'm grateful to the 9.5 million people. I've gotten to meet so many amazing people over the last 4 years that inspire me, and I think we delivered some real results for them.
Is there one result that you would say, okay, way down the road, when somebody looks back at the history of state attorneys general in New Jersey, they say, oh, Matt Platkin, he was the guy who...
Yeah, we didn't talk about it, but the decision to take over the Paterson Police Department 2.5 years ago is something that I'm extraordinarily proud of. It was a moment of crisis in that city, the third largest city in our state. It was something I didn't have to do, but I couldn't sleep at night knowing that there was something we could do about it and not do it. And in the last 2.5 years or so, we've seen crime plummet in that city. We've seen trust be restored. I was just there last Thursday. I'm extraordinarily proud of the progress we've made there, and I hope it continues.
I'll give you a little more space on that. What particular reform of the Paterson Police Department do you think helped reduce crime?
Oh, there were dozens. I mean, look, when I showed up in March of 2023, there were literal barricades in front of the police department keeping the public out. So the first thing I did is I said, I will not even do the press conference until those barricades are gone. And I think that was a symbolic gesture, but it was one that we carried through in terms of changing how the department interacts with the residents of that city. I brought in professional leadership. Issa Abbasi came over from New York City. We brought a new team. We brought some resources thanks to the governor and the legislature. We retrained everybody. We brought the public into the department. And now it's not just the stats. I mean, last year, 42 people were shot in Paterson. That's a 67% reduction since we took office. But the stats only tell part of the story. I've been to community events and block parties with hundreds of kids interacting with members of the police department. You would not have seen that in 2023 or before, when I was really worried about the crisis of confidence that law enforcement was facing in that city, which, by the way, was not good for the residents of that city who want to be safe and want to be treated with respect. It's also not good for the law enforcement officers who make up that department who want to do their jobs. And so I'm really proud of the reforms we've put in place. I think Paterson is a national model for a turnaround story in law enforcement. And yeah, if you ask me what I'm most proud of, that's right up there at the top of the list.
The outgoing New Jersey Attorney General, Matt Platkin. Thanks for sitting for this exit interview. We really appreciate it. Good luck in the future.
Thanks, Brian.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC. So there are these things called prediction markets where you can place wagers on anything from world events to elections to award show outcomes, so much more than just sports. Here's a sampling of things you can currently bet on using one of these platforms, Polymarket. What songs will be played at the Super Bowl halftime show? How many times will Elon Musk tweet between January 9th and January 16th? You might have also noticed this at the Golden Globes on Sunday. A small on-screen pop-up sponsored by another betting platform, Kalshi, showed the odds of each award in real time, essentially letting viewers track and potentially bet on the winners as the show unfolded. Then there are political bets, things like, will Donald Trump acquire Greenland before 2027? Will the Iranian regime fall by January 31st? Who will be the Republican presidential nominee in 2028? Now, sports betting was legalized at the federal level back in 2018. And to be clear, sports bets still make up the largest share of the market, about 90%. But these largely unregulated prediction markets have really taken off recently, and their growing popularity introduces a new set of questions, right? Like, how do you determine the outcome of a world event that people may not even agree on? Or what does insider trading look like in a market that isn't regulated, like the stock market? There was a viral video recently of the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, abruptly ending a press conference after about an hour and 4 minutes. And people online noticed that there had been an active bet on whether she would speak for more than an hour and 5 minutes. Some speculated it was an inside job, rigged. That's pure speculation, but it gives you a sense of the kinds of situations that this is producing. So another recent controversy involved a Polymarket bet on whether the U.S. would, quote, invade Venezuela. But when Maduro was ousted by President Trump and executive power was seized and transferred to his vice president, the platform ruled that this did not count as an invasion. Trump, of course, said it was an arrest. So these companies aren't just hosting bets, they're effectively acting as arbiters of truth. Now, Jonathan Cohen is a gambling historian and author of Losing Big, America's Reckless Bet on Sports Gambling. He's been on the show to talk about that. And he's with us now to talk through this emerging market and how the gamification of everything may blur the lines between gambling and investing and could even affect world affairs. Jonathan, thanks for coming on for this. Welcome back to WNYC.
Thanks. And can we talk about the $25,000 I have bet on the Finnish election this year? Is that okay?
No. We're going to keep that a secret so you don't reveal your conflict of interest. But FanDuel and the other sports betting apps have been around for a while, like I said. When did we start to see this gambling industry expansion beyond sports into politics, culture, world events?
So prediction markets themselves as a product have been around since the 80s and 90s, but they really sort of got their first foothold, let's say, in the U.S. for the 2016 election through some obscure Australian-run academic program, actually, technically it was. And then it was really during the Biden administration, or right around the Biden administration, that they took off as mainstream products for betting on things like election outcomes. And then they really took off. It was just at the beginning of 2025 when they began offering sports markets, and it was really the March Madness, the college basketball tournament last year, that they really got their foothold and became a mainstream gambling product along the likes of FanDuel or DraftKings.
And listeners, you are very invited in here. And Santiago in Brooklyn, we see your call. You're going to be first. Santiago calling already to say he uses prediction markets. And we want to hear from you. Do you use any of these betting platforms for anything other than sports? Folks, you want to tell us the most unlikely, absurd, funny, or maybe disturbingly inappropriate thing you've ever bet on or that someone you know did? 212-433 WNYC, something other than sports, obviously. 212-433-96 9692. Have you ever disagreed with how one of these apps determined an outcome? Or maybe you've noticed on the Robinhood app that it's not only for investing anymore, that's what Robinhood is, or tracking your IRA. You can also place sports bets or make wagers on world events there. So we want to hear your stories, your opinions, your questions. 212-433 WNYC 433-9692. Call or text. And Santiago in Brooklyn, you're on WNYC. Thank you for calling in. Hi.
Hi, thanks for having me. So I'm a user of one of these apps, Kalshi, which is one of the two big ones. And it may sound hypocritical, but I saw this and I felt so compelled to vote because they feel so bad for society in kind of a way that's similar to sports betting. They've infiltrated everything. If you watch the Golden Globes, they were playing Poly Market in the kind of the cuts between commercials. They were playing the predictions for the awards. It just felt so toxic. But one of the things I have that comment that I think is interesting is this sort of idea that these are these more accurate ways of finding out what's going to happen in world events, which I thought was funny. I'll give you an example related to New York. The mayoral election, for the longest time, until I think it might have been late May, it was showing that Andrew Cuomo was like 80% chance he was going to be mayor. And I know he was still leading the polls, the whole thing, but there seemed like this sort of giant lack of understanding and underpriced. Zoran Mamdani was at maybe 7%. And I bet on Zoran Mamdani because I thought he had a better chance, and it turned out great for me. And but all that, but it's sort of like it missed this huge, very obvious thing happening. And I think one of the last things I'll add is seeing how much this industry is now gaining steam and political influence. I saw this morning that Sean Patrick Maloney, the former congressman from New York, he was just named the head of like this sort of business organization that represents the prediction markets. So it seems like they're getting into lobbying now. And you'll go into the insider trading part later, but I think it's interesting that, for example, if you want to trade on stocks, you have to, you register, you have to verify your identification. You have to there's a record with the SEC of who makes these trades. But if you want to make a Polymarket account, you just set up a VPN and pretend like you're in France, and then you can just connect a crypto wallet. You don't have to put an ID in. So you can make bets on this stuff, and if you're like an insider trader or something like that. Those are my comments, yeah.
Thank you very much. There's a lot of insight there, Santiago. Thank you very much. So, Jonathan, anything you want to say to that call? And articulate for the listeners what you think the harm is of this. Some might think, well, okay, if I want to bet on Mamdani versus Cuomo in the election, or whether there's going to be regime change in Iran, it may be weird in a certain way, but nobody gets hurt. But does anybody get hurt?
Yeah, I don't want to be prudish because, sort of like you said, I think gambling can be fun and it's sort of a fun human pastime. Where I see people getting hurt are a few ways. First is you already outlined that these are sort of lightly regulated, especially compared to sports books and formal sports gambling. And they, at least on paper, FanDuel and DraftKings have to care about whether you lose your shirt and whether you run out of money and whether you get addicted to gambling. Whether they actually care, we can talk about, but they at least have to pretend to care. Kalshi and Polymarket don't even have to pretend. They have basically no gambling addiction protections. There are all these Twitter accounts that sort of showcase all these users who are losing all sorts of money because everything is public and every user's trades is public. So not only do you not have these consumer protections that you do have on some of these sports books, at least to a degree, you also have what you already alluded to, this sort of the gamblification. Like, are we sure we want to be advertising during the Golden Globes that you can gamble on the Golden Globes? Like, I'm okay with gambling in general, but should we really be sort of forcing it down people's throat and making everyone see every interaction or every news event as a way to make money and as something that they can sort of leverage predictive ability on? I think that, to me, is going a bit too far, not to mention the fact that it's happening on Robinhood, and the same app that you use to manage your 401k, you can use to bet on the Eagles. Well, not anymore, but you can bet on the Texans.
Anderson in White Plains has an international example of where he thinks this kind of thing is having a severe negative effect already. Anderson, you're on WNYC. Hello.
Yes, hi. In Brazil, I'm from Brazil, I live in New York, but in Brazil, soccer, as most people know, soccer is such an important part of the culture. It's so important, but unfortunately, the past 5 years was is being affected because the betting websites, which are mostly from the United States and some from Europe, they are so strong there. They lobby politicians in order to get the free range of how they operate. And these betting websites, they advertise on the big teams' uniforms, and on TV, the screen, you constantly get bombarded with their names. And celebrities are also paid
yes. But that's still sports betting. But what do you think the negative impact is that you call to describe?
Well, yeah. So the negative impact that I see is people really not enjoying the sport anymore as they used to. Like I was used to. They to watch with friends, and people are constantly on their phones looking as the game is going. How should I bet? How should I place a bet? And it's taken away from the enjoyment of the soccer and getting together with your friends and enjoying something so important to the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And also a lot of families are having enormous impact because some fathers, some mothers are losing everything because they keep trying to recuperate what they lost, and they never do.
Anderson, thank you for your call. We appreciate it. Jonathan, I want to come back to the Caroline Leavitt example that I used in the intro. These press conference rumors that she ended this particular news conference at an hour and 4 minutes, maybe because she knew there was a betting market where the over-under was at an hour and 5 minutes. And those rumors weren't confirmed, but they introduced the idea that this kind of thing is possible, that officials could bet on events they're involved in. So if you work in the State Department or have access to classified information in any way, what's stopping you from betting on a world event before it becomes public, and then maybe even trying to bring about that outcome, even if it's bad for the country or bad for the world? I mean, that strikes me as one of the worst case scenarios here.
Yeah, and just to be clear, there's no evidence that Caroline Leavitt actually did bet any money. I think it was $250 or something that was bet that she would end below 65 minutes. But the fact that you might even think that she's doing it because of the prediction market.
Whoops. Did we lose Jonathan?
Is sort of of the
you're back.
of itself.
Yeah.
I mean, trust in institutions is, of course, in such high supply in American society these days that now we have just this other vector of people to distrust and to feel that things are rigged, let's say, in their favor. And on this insider trading question, on paper, insider trading should be a asset. Insider trading should be part of the point of a prediction market. Is if you have better information than the public, you should be able to leverage that, because if a prediction market is in fact a source of truth and a way to assess the wisdom of the crowds, then let every member of the crowd, including those with insider information, leverage that information. But because these companies want to be legitimate and they want to be seen as legitimate financial instruments, not just gambling products, they have to say that insider trading is not allowed. Whether or not they do anything about it is a separate question, but they have to claim that insider trading is not allowed, that you can't invade Venezuela, or you can't bet $400,000 on the invasion of Venezuela and then go about and actually invade Venezuela.
Are there any confirmed cases of government insiders actually profiting off prediction markets by then making policy that conforms, or are we still in a warning sign stage?
I think warning sign. We have indications that these are still under investigation, not about government actors, but of people with insider information. There was a huge amount bet on Aaron Judge to win the American League MVP right before it was announced. There was a huge amount bet on the awarding of the Nobel Peace Prize to the Venezuelan activist right before it was announced publicly. So there seem to be these cases where people are leveraging inside information. But again, what these companies are going to do about it, I don't know.
Yeah. You report that the president's son, Donald Trump Jr., has become a paid strategic advisor to the prediction market, Kalshi, which is, as we've said, one of the biggest players. And how unusual is that level of family involvement, president's family, in an industry that's supposed to be regulated by the federal government?
That's right. And I can't tell if this is sort of normal Washington scuzzy business stuff where you appoint the president's son or the AG's nephew or whatever to be on your board just to give them sort of a glorified position. And just to be clear, he's also a strategic advisor with Polymarket, which is Kalshi's a competitor. So I can't tell if this is sort of real and a way to protect the industry, or if this is just sort of typical Washington stuff. But I certainly think it basically draws a red line. And I've talked to lobbyists who are working on this issue and who have proposed or are working on legislation to restrict and limit prediction markets. And they basically see it as a total no-go, and that there's no way you're going to get Republicans in Congress to support such a legislation because they know that the president ultimately will not support the legislation.
Yeah, I see that Congressman Richie Torres from the Bronx is one of those who has introduced legislation in this realm. But why would it break down along partisan lines?
In this case, it might break down purely because the Republicans have been forced into being pro prediction market because Donald Trump Jr. has now invested in prediction markets. I do think nominally it shouldn't break down on partisan lines. Folks, the anti-gambling chorus in Congress actually cuts both ways in very interesting ways. But prediction markets, because of their connections to politics, seem to be, and both connections to politics, I mean, in terms of both the investment by the Trump family, but also because they actually, as you've alluded to, the fact that you can bet on political outcomes seems to sort of be perpendicular to the sports gambling conversation. And the sports gambling conversation, that crosses red, blue in all sorts of interesting ways. But the prediction markets, it might not work out that way.
Let's see, what should I do with our last minute? I guess I'm going to ask you about if one wanted to bet that Marco Rubio is going to be the Republican presidential candidate in 2028, to take that hypothetical. Would I have to wait until 2028 to see the returns on that bet, or can people cash out before then based on how the odds change over time? Does it get that granular and maybe addictive in that respect?
Yeah, it's absolutely that granular, and this is why you have people who are on these sites and are using them every minute and every day. They claim that they can't sleep because they don't want to miss an odds change, which is this is not like you're betting on the Bears and you have to wait 3 hours until the Bears game is over and then you either win or lose your bet. You buy the odds of Marco Rubio being the presidential nominee are 20%, but you think they're going to go up. And so you buy them at 20%, and then he announces his campaign, for example, the odds go up to 40%, and you can cash out at a 20-cent profit per share. So that's the point of prediction markets, is it's not you're actually trying to predict what happens, it's you're trying to predict what other people think is going to happen and whether you can make money to that effect.
That is where we have to leave it with Jonathan Cohen, gambling historian, author of the book Losing Big, America's Reckless Bet on Sports Gambling. Jonathan, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Brian Lehrer Weekend. We're back on the radio Monday morning at 10 a.m. In the meantime, follow us on Blue Sky at The Brian Lehrer Show, where there's always a conversation 24/7.